In this video, we dive deep into the cold-blooded world of Jamie Stevenson, a man once known as the best man at a gangster's wedding, and later accused of orchestrating his murder. From the streets of Glasgow to encrypted messages on secret networks, Stevenson carved out a reputation as one of Scotland's most feared underworld figures. He was building an empire, nearly a ton of high-purity coke smuggled into the UK inside banana crates, a secret factory producing 28 million street Valium pills, with international links stretching from Scotland to Spain and Abu Dhabi to Ecuador. But no criminal enterprise lasts forever, and as the walls closed in on him, Stevenson went from untouchable kingpin to a fugitive facing the full weight of the law. We'll break down the rise, rule, and eventual downfall of the man once dubbed Scotland's Tony Soprano, and reveal the shocking details behind one of the UK's most extraordinary criminal careers. It's October 2001, Glasgow's north side. The air is heavy outside a pub in Springburn. Laughter spills into the street as punters step outside for a smoke. It's just past 10 p.m. A few figures linger near the doors, familiar faces in the local area. Tony McGovern among them. Without warning, a shot is fired. Chaos erupts. McGovern goes down in the street. People scatter. Tires screech. Sirens wail into the distance. Within minutes, the street is swarming with blue lights and forensic tents. One of Glasgow's most well-known gangland figures is dead. No arrests are made that night, but soon a name emerges. Jamie Stevenson, a known figure in Scotland's criminal underworld, is later arrested and charged with McGovern's murder. The connection between them runs deep. McGovern hadn't just known Stevenson. He'd once trusted him enough to make him his best man. It was a headline that stunned Glasgow. A man standing accused of murdering someone he once stood beside at a wedding altar. But the case wouldn't last long. A lack of evidence, no witness testimony, and eventually, the charges were dropped. There wasn't a conviction, not even a trial. But there was a growing silence around Stevenson's name, one that came with weight, and in Glasgow's underworld, silence is currency. While others fell, Stevenson kept moving. This wasn't the end of a story. It was just the beginning. After serving time for laundering over £1 million of dirty money, Jamie Stevenson was released from prison in 2014. But any thoughts that he might step away from the criminal world were quickly put to rest. Quietly, and without the kind of attention that had followed him years earlier, Stevenson re-entered the scene. But this time, his ambitions had grown. The man who once operated in the shadows of Glasgow gangland began building something bigger, smarter, more global. No longer just a player on the streets, Stevenson was now orchestrating from a higher level, connecting dots across continents. Scotland was still home, but his network now stretched across the UK and into Spain, Ecuador, and even Abu Dhabi. He wasn't relying on muscle anymore. This was business, strategic, and digital, using encrypted communication platforms like EncroChat. These secure networks gave him and others like him the confidence to plot high-level drug movements and financial operations with near-complete anonymity, or so they thought. Behind the scenes, a complex web was forming. Cocaine routes linking South America to Britain, financial flows moving between Europe and the Middle East, associates positioned in ports, front companies, warehouses. Stevenson was no longer just surviving in the underworld. He was thriving. And no one, it seemed, was watching. But the Iceman hadn't just returned. He was evolving, setting the stage for what would become one of the most sophisticated and lucrative criminal enterprises. enterprises in recent UK history. It's the early hours of a damp September morning at the port of Dover. The wind rolls in off the channel, tugging at the corners of high-vis jackets as Border Force officers move quietly between rows of steel shipping containers. Most of these shipments are routine. Crates of fruit, electronics, textiles, the usual flow of international goods. But one container stands out. Manifested as a consignment of bananas from Ecuador, bound for a Glasgow-based fruit merchant, it doesn't look suspicious at first glance. Still, officers have been told to pay close attention. Intelligence shared between the National Crime Agency and international partners has flagged this shipment. There's reason to believe it's carrying something far more valuable than fruit. As the container doors creak open, officers begin unpacking boxes. The first few layers contain what's expected: bananas, carefully stacked. But deeper inside, they find something else: tightly wrapped packages. Not just one or two, but row after row. One is opened on the spot. Inside, a fine white powder, cocaine, high purity, around 73%. In total, there are 119 packages. When it's all tallied up, the seizure comes in just shy of a metric ton. On the street, this shipment could fetch up to £76 million. Wholesale, the value is estimated at around £38 million. But the money is only part of the story. This container isn't just a delivery, it's evidence of a much larger operation. A transnational drug route, engineered with precision, moving product from South America to the UK through a series of carefully controlled handoffs. The investigation that led to this moment had been building quietly behind the scenes for months. The NCA and Border Force weren't just monitoring ports. They were watching encrypted messages, tracking movements, mapping out the criminal infrastructure behind the scenes. EncroChat, once believed to be a secure platform used by thousands of criminals across Europe, had already been infiltrated. Messages that were once completely hidden were now being read in real time. The conversations were coded, references to fruit, containers, drops and deliveries, but over time, patterns started to emerge. Shipping routes, recipient names, burner phone numbers, all gradually connecting the dots between South American suppliers, European brokers, and British distributors. And woven into this web, the name Jamie Stevenson began to surface again and again. He wasn't mentioned directly in intercepted messages, but the activity around him started matching the timing of the shipments. Phone data, known associates, financial activity, and historic surveillance began lining up. The evidence was circumstantial, but growing stronger by the day. Investigators eventually tied Stevenson to two key aliases on EncroChat: Elusival and Big Tasty. Through these usernames, he coordinated shipments, discussed logistics, and managed production numbers, all while believing he was untouchable behind encrypted screens. But once those conversations were decrypted, the digital trail led straight back to him. What investigators now believed was this: Stevenson had moved beyond being a local figure in the Scottish underworld. He was now operating on a different level entirely, as a coordinator and high-level trafficker, linking international supply with UK-based distribution. His operation wasn't reliant on gangland muscle or chaotic street deals. It was built on logistics, structured, discreet, and dangerously efficient. The choice of bananas was clever. Fresh produce is moved quickly through ports, often with minimal inspection. The containers are temperature-controlled and have rapid turnover, which reduces the window for detection. And the company listed as the recipient in Glasgow appeared to be legitimate, at least on paper. But it didn't take long for investigators to realize the business had been used as a front. Whether knowingly or under pressure, it had become part of the route used to smuggle drugs into the UK. The Dover seizure didn't just stop one shipment, it lifted the lid on an entire network. Forensic teams began breaking down everything: packaging materials, shipping codes, serial numbers on the containers, digital tracking logs. Even the pallets themselves were traced back to their point of origin. The operation spanned the UK, Spain, Ecuador, and Abu Dhabi, with suspected collaborators and infrastructure in each location. This wasn't the work of a chaotic drug crew. It was the product of organized crime. And Jamie Stevenson was now at the center of that map. By the time the container was seized, Stevenson had already gone to ground. His digital footprint began to disappear. Encrypted devices were wiped. Associates stopped using old numbers. There were rumors he'd fled to Spain, possibly further, but the damage was done. The cocaine bust had exposed his reach and shown just how far his criminal enterprise had evolved since the days of small-time laundering and local feuds. The Iceman, once a shadowy figure in Glasgow's gangland, was now an international trafficker, a key player in one of the most sophisticated smuggling routes uncovered in recent UK history. And although he'd managed to stay in the wind for now, the pressure was building. The evidence was mounting. And somewhere out there, Jamie Stevenson knew the net was starting to tighten. It's almost midday on a quiet industrial estate on the outskirts of Kent. One particular warehouse hums with a mechanical rhythm. The sound of machinery echoes through the building, the whir of industrial mixers, the steady clunk of pill presses, and the faint, constant rattle of tablets dropping into bags. Inside, masked workers move methodically between workstations. The lighting is cold, fluorescent. Harsh shadows stretch across plastic tubs filled with tens of thousands of small blue pills. It doesn't look like chaos, not yet. Then the silence is shattered, a sudden crash of steel and shouted commands. Armed police flood the building in a coordinated raid. Red dot lasers sweep across the walls. One of the workers drops a tub. Pills scatter across the floor like confetti. An officer lifts a sealed bag off the table. It's packed with bright blue etizolum tablets, a cheap, dangerous form of street Valium. He turns to the others in shock. There's millions of them, ready to flood the streets. The raid marked the collapse of a major production hub, one linked to Jamie Stevenson's criminal network. Unlike the glamour of high-purity cocaine moved across continents, this part of the empire was built on something far cheaper. But in many ways, it was just as devastating. Etizolum, a cheap synthetic benzodiazepine, is often called street Valium. It had become one of the most widely abused drugs in Scotland. It was cheap, easy to conceal, and dangerously addictive. It didn't make headlines like cocaine or heroin, but it was quietly fueling a public health crisis, especially in working-class communities hit hardest by addiction and poverty. Investigators traced the operation back to this factory in Kent. From the outside, it looked like a standard commercial unit. No branding, no foot traffic, nothing to draw attention. But inside, it had been converted into a fully functioning pill mill. The machines were capable of producing millions of tablets at industrial speed. By the time the police moved in, the facility had already pumped out an estimated 28 million etizolum pills. These weren't just stored in the building. Many had already entered the supply chain, distributed through Scottish criminal networks, and often sold at pocket change prices to addicts looking for anything to numb the day. This wasn't about glamour or wealth, it was volume. Pure mass production. Where cocaine brought high profit returns from a smaller client base, etizolum was about feeding mass demand, keeping the streets supplied, maintaining dependency, and generating constant turnover. Authorities later revealed that the Kent factory was directly linked to the same transnational network uncovered during the Dover cocaine bust. Surveillance and message intercepts showed Stevenson and his associates discussing routes, production numbers, and even chemical suppliers, all through encrypted platforms like EncroChat. Just like with the banana shipment, everything had been structured. Messages sent through coded language, containers of raw ingredients sourced from overseas, tablets pressed to resemble pharmaceutical-grade products, and then boxed, bagged, and distributed using the same shell companies and middlemen seen in the cocaine routes. But this part of the empire operated differently. The cocaine shipments were high risk, high reward. One bust could wipe out tens of millions in street value. But with the Valium production, the risk was spread. Lower visibility, lower suspicion, and far more difficult to stop. The raid was a turning point, not just because of the sheer scale of the operation, but because it gave investigators another critical piece of the puzzle. They now had physical evidence, pill samples, packaging, machinery, and most importantly, communications. Devices seized in the building included mobile phones, encrypted handsets, and laptops. Messages tied directly to EncroChat aliases that had already appeared in the cocaine investigation. Slowly, the pieces were coming together. A picture was forming of a criminal network that had evolved into something bigger than anyone had expected. It wasn't just drugs being smuggled. It was a business model, with Stevenson as its CEO. At this point, authorities had two major wins under their belt: the seizure of nearly a ton of high-purity cocaine, and now, the dismantling of a street-level pill production line capable of flooding entire regions. Authorities got close. In June 2020, Stevenson was arrested in Glasgow, one of the first big moves in a case that was still quietly building behind the scenes. He was charged in connection with the drug network and released on bail while investigators gathered further evidence. But Stevenson had no intention of sticking around. With the walls closing in, he vanished. Phones went dark, associates scattered, and just like that, the Iceman slipped through the cracks. Reports suggested he'd left the UK. Spain was a likely destination, though there were also whispers of connections in Abu Dhabi. If he was moving, he was doing it carefully. No phones, no digital trail, staying offline. Disappearing into the places where extradition gets complicated and old-school contacts still protect powerful names. Even so, the evidence was now building across multiple investigations. From drug seizures to factory raids, intercepted messages to financial records. It was all starting to stack up. And back in Scotland, where the pills were landing on street corners and in housing estates, the message was starting to shift. People were talking again, not just about the drugs, but about the man who had once seemed untouchable. The Iceman had built an empire, but now it's the bit where it all starts falling apart. For years, Jamie Stevenson operated in the shadows. A name known in criminal circles, but rarely spoken aloud. His empire stretched across continents, and his movements were careful, calculated, and often completely invisible to the public eye. But in the spring of 2020, everything changed. That was when investigators quietly pulled off a significant breakthrough. They had infiltrated EncroChat, used by thousands of criminals across Europe, and Stevenson's network was among them. At first, no one in his circle noticed. The messages still sent, the deliveries still moved, the business still ran. But behind the scenes, authorities were watching in real time, reading thousands of conversations between traffickers, fixers, money launderers, and high-level organizers. The scale of intelligence gathered was unprecedented. It didn't take long for investigators to start connecting the dots. The cocaine in the banana crates, the pill factory in Kent, the money, the names, the locations. Stevenson's own alias on the platform may not have been known at first, but his digital fingerprints were all over the logistics. The encrypted veil had lifted, and with it, his criminal operation began to unravel. Throughout 2021, authorities used the EncroChat evidence to carry out raids, arrests, and seizures across the UK and mainland Europe. Dozens of arrests were made. Cash, weapons, drugs, phones, all pulled from homes, warehouses, and hideouts. One by one, parts of the network crumbled, but Stevenson himself was gone. He'd disappeared long before the first headlines about EncroChat ever hit the public. He knew the risk, knew the timing, and when the pressure began to mount, he slipped away without a trace. For months there was nothing, no phone data, no CCTV, no known movements. Investigators suspected he had left the UK, likely headed for Spain, where several other British fugitives had historically found safe haven. But others believed he'd gone further, possibly to Abu Dhabi, where financial links had been detected through shell companies and investment proxies. Then, in 2022, Jamie Stevenson's name reappeared. This time not in gangland whispers, but on a public list. He was named as one of the UK's 12 most wanted fugitives, a list compiled by the National Crime Agency as part of a high-profile international appeal. Mugshots were released, descriptions circulated through airports, embassies, and major media outlets across Europe. Stevenson was now officially a fugitive, and the hunt was on. The campaign, coordinated with Europol and Interpol, targeted areas known for hosting British criminals on the run. Resorts in Spain's Costa del Sol, high-rise flats in Dubai, remote villas rented under fake names. Wherever fugitives went to disappear, the pressure followed. And eventually, it worked. In late 2022, law enforcement tracked Stevenson to a foreign address, details of which were never publicly released. He was taken into custody and extradited back to the UK to face a long list of charges stemming from the investigations sparked by the EncroChat breakthrough. For a man who had spent years avoiding the public eye, the return to Glasgow was anything but quiet. Cameras followed as he was led into court. Police outlined the case. Nearly a ton of cocaine, 28 million Valium tablets, connections to 4 countries, encrypted messages, seized assets. Stevenson, once a ghost in the system, was now at the center of one of the biggest organized crime trials in recent memory. And despite years of silence, the evidence spoke loudly. When Jamie Stevenson finally returned to court in 2023, it wasn't with the bravado of a kingpin or the silence of a martyr. It was businesslike, calculated. He knew the weight of what was coming, and he was ready to cut a deal. Midway through the trial, Stevenson changed his plea. Guilty. The prosecution called him one of the most senior players in Scotland's organised crime scene. A man who had managed to stay off the radar while building one of the largest drug enterprises the country had seen in recent years. Stevenson was given 12 years for directing the importation of nearly a ton of cocaine. On top of that, he was handed another 8 years for his role in producing and supplying more than 28 million etizolum tablets, manufactured in a Kent factory he helped run. The judge ruled they were separate operations and made the sentences consecutive. That brought his total to 20 years behind bars. But following an appeal, that was later reduced to 16 years and 3 months. He wasn't the only one sentenced. David Billsland, the fruit trader whose business gave the cocaine route its appearance of legitimacy, was jailed for 6 years. Lloyd Cross, one of Stevenson's closest go-betweens, also received 6. Others involved in the pill operation, Paul Bowes, Gerard Carbin, and Ryan McPhee, were sentenced to between 4 and 7 years. A separate associate, Lewis Connor, was jailed for arson after phone evidence tied him to fires across central Scotland. Investigators later revealed that Connor, using the encrypted handle Living Silver, had been in regular contact with Stevenson. They weren't planning an attack on arrival. They were torching Stevenson's own former home, a £375,000 property in Denny Lonehead, Falkirk, which he'd lost in a proceeds of crime battle. In one exchange, Living Silver messaged, "I will burn your old gaff to the ground." Shortly after the fire, Living Silver followed up with a message, "Burnt to hell, place just took. We'll send someone to take a pic if you want. Place was like Blackpool Illuminations when I left." And he wasn't done. Another message read, "Feel like the IRA back in the day, keeping me busy, giving me something to do. The next target, a beauty salon in Hamilton, Lanarkshire, known as Cece's, also connected to Stevenson. Follow the cow home, Big Tasty instructed. The salon was gutted by a fire just days later. One by one, the entire crew fell. In the end, it wasn't a bullet or betrayal that brought the Iceman down. It was surveillance, patience, quiet pressure, encrypted chat logs, shipment manifests, a container full of bananas that didn't add up, a silent figure who thought he was untouchable, finally brought down by the very systems he believed couldn't touch him. Because this is how it ends for men like Jamie Stevenson. You can run routes through 4 countries. You can move millions in powder and pills. You can vanish behind encrypted screens and silent companies. But eventually, it all comes to the surface. Whether you're importing coke in crates of bananas or pressing pills by the million in a backstreet warehouse, the game always catches up. And when it does, the empire doesn't just fall. It cages you and buries everything with it. For more raw and real crime stories, hit the like button and subscribe. Until the next episode, stay alert and stay safe.